Most people misunderstand when a narcissist becomes dangerous. The real danger begins at the moment they can no longer make you comply. Until then, everything is a game. After that, it becomes something else entirely. I want to be precise about what I mean by this, because there is a version of this observation that gets repeated in simplified form, and the simplification misses the part that matters most. The danger I am describing is not physical. In most cases, it is psychological, and psychological danger, when it comes from someone who has studied your particular architecture for years, can be extraordinarily difficult to recognize while it is happening. In my practice, I spent considerable time with patients who were in relationships with what I came to call the power-oriented personality. The person whose primary psychological organizing principle is control, who requires at a fundamental level that the people around them remain in a predictable position relative to them, and who responds to any deviation from that position with a series of maneuvers that I found across many cases to follow a remarkably consistent pattern. I call this pattern the 5 stages of control collapse, and once you have seen it described clearly, you will recognize it. Not because it is unusual, but because it is one of the most reliable sequences in all of interpersonal psychology. Stay with me, because the next part changes the meaning of everything you thought you understood about how these relationships work. Before I describe the stages, I want to say something about why the pattern is so consistent. It is consistent because it is not strategic in the conscious sense. The person moving through these stages is not planning. They are reacting to what is, for them, an intolerable condition. The loss of control is not merely frustrating for the power-oriented personality. It is terrifying. When that arrangement is threatened, what emerges is not calculation. It is panic expressed as aggression. Understanding this does not mean excusing it, but understanding it means you will not be confused about what you are facing. And confusion in these situations is one of the things that keeps people trapped. The first stage is what I called intensified charm, when the power-oriented personality first senses that control is loosening. Their initial response is almost always an increase in the behavior that originally established the relationship. They become warmer, more attentive, more generous with their time and their apparent care. They say the things you have been wanting to hear. They notice things they had long stopped noticing. They may apologize, sometimes with what appears to be genuine depth for specific failures. I saw this stage confuse patients enormously. They had been waiting in many cases for years for exactly this response. And here it was. And it felt in the moment like the change they had been hoping for. But I noticed something consistent across every case. The intensified charm was precisely calibrated. It addressed the specific complaint that had led to the loosening of control, not the underlying pattern, not the fundamental dynamic, only the surface behavior that had become visible. And it lasted exactly as long as it needed to last to restore the previous arrangement. The moment the arrangement was restored, the original behavior returned, sometimes within days. The charm is not evidence of change, it is evidence of the perceived threat. If you are watching this, and something in you recognizes this stage from your own experience, I would be glad if you subscribe to this channel, because what follows is the progression that most people do not see coming until it has already happened. The second stage arrives when the charm does not work. When the person who was previously controllable continues to pull away despite the warmth, the apologies, the apparent transformation. What emerges then is something quite different. I called it reframing the narrative. In this stage, the power-oriented personality begins to reconstruct the story of the relationship publicly. In conversations with family members, mutual friends, colleagues, the version that emerges is always structured the same way. They are reasonable. You are unreasonable. They have been patient. You have been erratic. They are the victim of your instability, your ingratitude, your cruelty. I am not suggesting that every person who presents themselves as wronged is a power-oriented personality engaged in narrative reconstruction. Genuine grievances exist on all sides of most human conflicts. What I am identifying is a specific pattern. The sudden, comprehensive reconstruction of the entire relationship history the moment control is threatened, and the speed with which their social network receives and accepts this reconstruction. This stage is particularly damaging because it operates before you have had any opportunity to offer a different account. By the time you become aware of what is being said, the narrative has already been established. Correcting an established narrative is considerably harder than being the first to tell the story. Let me tell you about a patient I will call Elsa. She came to me after leaving a marriage of 20 years. Her husband, by all the accounts she provided and which I found consistently credible, had been a man of considerable charm and considerable control. He had managed her relationships with her family, her friendships, her professional choices, her sense of herself, with a patience and thoroughness that had taken her years to recognize for what it was. When she finally left, she discovered that her husband had spent the preceding months in conversation with nearly everyone she knew. Her family believed she had suffered a breakdown. Her closest friend believed she had become involved with someone else. Her colleagues had heard that she had always been unstable and that her husband had protected them from this. She had left him, and within weeks she found herself almost entirely alone. This is the second stage at its most complete, and it is, I want to say plainly, one of the most effective psychological weapons in human relationships, because it does not just damage your reputation, it damages your ability to trust your own account of what happened. When everyone around you has received a different version of events and believes it, the question begins to form, even in the clearest mind, am I the one who is wrong? Stay with me, because the third stage is the one that most people find hardest to name. The third stage I called escalation through vulnerability. Once the narrative reconstruction is established, once the social environment has been shaped, the power-oriented personality begins to deploy what they know about your specific sensitivities. Every long relationship produces intimate knowledge. You have shared your fears, your history, your wounds. You have trusted this person with the parts of yourself that are most easily hurt. In the third stage, that knowledge is used. It is not always used crudely. In fact, in my experience, it is most often used with considerable precision and deniability. A comment that could be read as innocent, but that you know from years of experience is aimed at exactly the wound it finds. A behavior that described to anyone outside the relationship would sound trivial, but that you understand as a direct communication about what they know they can do to you. A connection made between something you revealed in confidence years ago and your current behavior, offered as apparent concern, but functioning as a reminder of your vulnerability. This stage is designed to produce a specific effect. It is designed to make the cost of continued separation feel higher than the cost of return. To make you feel that being outside this person's good graces is more dangerous than being inside their control. The fourth stage arrives when the first three have not produced the desired result. I called it the abandonment performance. And it is in some ways the most psychologically interesting of all the stages, because it inverts the entire structure of what has come before. Until this point, the power-oriented personality has been pursuing charming, reframing, deploying vulnerability. All of this is pursued, dressed in various clothing. In the fourth stage, they stop, they withdraw, they become suddenly completely unavailable. They may announce through intermediaries or directly that they are done, that they are moving on, that they have finally accepted the situation and are releasing it. For the person they have been trying to control, this withdrawal produces an effect that is almost physiological. The pursuit has been the constant. The presence, even when threatening, has been the familiar condition. When it disappears, what rushes in is something that feels like loss, even when the relationship was damaging. The nervous system, long organized around this person's presence and moods, experiences their withdrawal as an emergency. This is the moment when many people make contact, when they reach out, when they say, perhaps we should talk. And that reaching out is received almost always as the restoration of the arrangement. The pursuit resumes, often immediately, the warmth returns, and the cycle restarts from the beginning. Heinrich, a physician I had worked with, had been through this cycle 11 times across a 20-year marriage before he recognized it as a cycle rather than genuine reconciliation. He told me that the most disturbing thing was not that it had happened 11 times, it was that each time it had felt entirely new. The fifth stage is the one that occurs when none of the previous stages have succeeded. When the person has recognized the pattern and maintained separation despite the charm, the narrative reconstruction, the deployed vulnerabilities, and the abandonment performance. I call this stage the permanent verdict. In this stage, the power-oriented personality arrives at a fixed position about you that they will maintain indefinitely. You are, in this verdict, fundamentally flawed in a way that explains the entire history of the relationship. You were always difficult, you were always ungrateful, you were always incapable of genuine connection. The relationship failed not because of the dynamic between you, but because of something essentially wrong with you. This verdict serves a specific function. It protects the power-oriented personality from the only alternative explanation available to them, which is that the dynamic they maintained, the control they required, the arrangement they built, was itself the source of the problem. The permanent verdict closes that possibility. It locates the cause of failure entirely in you, and it does so with a finality that prevents re-examination. This fifth stage arrives with such apparent conviction that it can be difficult not to receive it as truth when someone who knew you intimately delivers a comprehensive judgment about your essential character. Something in the mind takes that seriously, even when you know rationally what you are looking at. What helps is understanding that the permanence of the verdict is itself the terror. Genuine understanding of a person is always incomplete, always subject to revision. The permanent verdict is not understanding. It is a closed door protecting something the person behind it cannot afford to examine. I want to offer you something small and practical before I close. If you are inside one of these stages now or suspect that you might be, there is one question worth writing down and returning to regularly. It is this: does the behavior I am observing make more sense as a response to me or as a response to the loss of control over me? That question, held steadily and honestly, can provide a kind of orientation when everything around you is designed to disorient. Elsa, after 2 years of work, arrived at a clarity about her situation that she described in terms I have not forgotten. She said that understanding the 5 stages had not made her angry. It had made her sad. Sad for the person who needed control so completely that they had organized an entire relationship and then an entire social network around maintaining it. And sad for the years she had spent inside an arrangement she had mistaken for love. That sadness, I told her, was a sign of genuine understanding. Not of what had been done to her, but of what had made it possible. And genuine understanding, in my experience, is the only thing that reliably produces the kind of freedom that does not need to be maintained through constant effort. What stage do you recognize from your own experience? You do not have to name the relationship, only the stage. Leave that in the comments if you are willing. There is a thread that runs naturally from this conversation into the question of what happens inside the person who finally stays free, what they find there, and what it requires of them. That is worth continuing another time. Before I leave this subject, I want to say one thing about the person on the receiving end of these 5 stages. The focus tends to land on the behavior of the power-oriented personality. But I am equally interested in what happens inside the person they have been trying to control. What I observed consistently is that people who have moved through all 5 stages and maintain their separation emerge with something unexpected, not hardness, not cynicism. What they emerge with when the work goes well is a very precise clarity about human motivation that they did not have before. They have learned the difference between love and control, between genuine care and the performance of care in service of an agenda, between warmth that wants something from you and warmth that simply wants you. This education is costly, but the knowledge it produces is real, and the people who carry it tend to form subsequent relationships with a discernment that others take decades longer to develop. Elsa, 5 years after our work concluded, sent me a brief letter. She had remarried. She described her new husband in very few words. She said only that he was someone who became more interested in her the more freely she expressed herself, that he did not require her to be manageable in order to be loved. She said that she would not have known to look for that quality or to recognize it when she found it, if she had not learned so precisely what its absence looked like. That is the last thing I want to leave you with. The pattern I have described today is a description of damage, but the people who survive it, who recognize it, who understand it clearly enough to move through it and stay free, carry something on the other side that is genuinely worth having.